o'clock in the morning on the 16th day of August in the summer of 1954 in a small farming village in southern New Mexico. Something happened that I cannot remember, but I will never forget. The whole scene takes place in my head, which is a place where I have invented. Sorry, I can't see very well with them. Can I like some more light? The whole scene takes place in my head, which is the place where I have invented almost everything, and at home, and I have. I think now I can see here. Maybe. Here. Oh, thank you. Oh, this is perfect. I'm starting to get up, sorry. I lost myself and found myself in a city in which I love. At around 8 o'clock in the morning on the 16th day of August, in the summer of 1954, on a small farming village in southern New Mexico, something happened that I cannot remember and that I will never forget. The whole scene takes place in my head, which is a place where I have invented and reinvented, and at times wholly invented, many scenes in the life I have lived. This all happened in my grandmother's house, and that is not something I invented. My grandmother was a partera, one of the many arts she practiced. Her warm and patient hands guided me into the light. It was not a long and difficult labor. My mother told me that the summer rains started just before she went into labor. My other grandmother was in the room. She took me in her arms, and her face lit up the entire room. Mira, she said, se parece a mi Benjamin. Her youngest son had not lived long enough to celebrate his first birthday. My grandmother resurrected her son's name and handed it to me, Benjamin, the youngest son, the son of the right hand of the father, the highly favored son. I came into this world surrounded by the rain and the three women who taught me how to be a man, Teresa, Josefina, and Eloisa. Those three women are gone now, though their voices were embedded in my heart that was born somehow wounded. Loving was easier than being loved, and I inherited the desire to love from the three women who were present at my birth. They were fierce and uncensored affection, and in their presence, I did let myself be loved. I don't know which has been more persuasive in the way I have lived my life, to think or to feel. I have always had a great respect for the intellectual life. I was aware of the fact that I was born with a good mind. Thinking gave me order. Feeling brought me chaos and apocalypse. Thinking made me feel superior. Feeling gave me a sense that humility had an important role in my life. Feeling made my life more difficult. Having a good mind made my life easier and gave me a sense of order and pride. But thinking also made me a little judgmental. Feeling forced me to learn the word forgiveness. Feeling helped me to make good friends. Thinking helped me to keep them. Thinking made me cautious. Feeling made me fearless. Having a good heart made my life disorderly and messy, but a good heart was also stubborn, and it is not easily defeated. My intellect has served me well as a writer. I learned the importance of acquiring knowledge and learned the meaning of the word discipline. But it is my stubborn heart that has made me the writer that I have become. You must understand this one thing. There was no plan B. I was going to become a writer. I am a living, functioning paradox. I have always known who I was, and yet I have many moments when I have been a stranger unto myself. That paradox has defined my life. People who know themselves don't feel lost. And I always felt myself to be at a lost. The middle child sandwiched between two older brothers and an older sister, a younger sister and two younger brothers. Everything was crowded, and I felt pushed into places where I did not fit. I was born with a strange and chronic hunger to know about things that were beyond my reach. I was torn between wanting to belong to the loud and busy world, which is my inheritance, and wanting to live in a quiet world of my own making. Though I was surrounded by love, I was at a loss to explain why I felt so alone. I was always looking for a road that would take me to a place where I could rest from the chronic disquiet that raced incessantly from my head to my heart and back again. Being sexually abused didn't help, but I could keep a secret. I don't know whether keeping a secret like that was a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know what my life would have looked like if I had said something. I look back at that little boy and think about how brave he was. Afraid and confused, the boy pushed me to find a world that was kinder than the world he lived in. That boy pushed me towards books, and I never really understood why, but I always lost myself in my own writing. Why does matter, but not always. I left the whys behind and let myself be lost in the words I wrote. Writing was a place, and it was a place where I belonged. Most other places, I felt I was in exile. Writing dug deep into me, dug past my hurts, dug past all the things I was afraid of, dug past all the questions that had no answers. I dug and dug, all an archaeologist looking for the missing pieces that were the mysteries and answers to his life. I dug and dug and dug until I found Ben. This is you, Ben. This is you. I could never have a life that was nice and neat and respectable. That is not what I wanted. I don't believe for 1 second that having money makes you admirable. I don't actually believe that having a good job makes you a good person. I don't believe that being poor means that you have no ambition. And I don't believe that rich people are rich because they work harder. My parents worked harder than I ever worked, and they never had half the things that I have now. Having grown up poor, I don't believe that one's poverty is something to be ashamed of. It is no accident that I fell in love with a city that was anything but nice and neat. A city that was anything but respected. A city that was looked down upon. A city overwhelmingly populated by Mexican Americans. And when you said Mexican Americans, it meant you were not proper Americans, and never would be. Never would be meant never allowed to be. Never allowed to be meant discrimination, meant racism. And I knew about racism. I knew about racism. This community was full of love. This community was a city that was too hardworking, too forgiving, and too generous to live in anger and rage, which did not mean that we did not understand what was happening. I always felt looked down upon. I always felt myself to be inadequate. I was made to feel that way and stop feeling that way when I started listening to my own voice that knew better. It is not a good thing to let others tell you who you are, especially if those others know nothing about you. Because I am an openly gay man, many people think they know something about me, when in fact, they know nothing about me. When outsiders hear that El Paso is 85% Hispanic, they think they know the city, but they don't. I sought out a job at the University of Texas at El Paso because it was my ticket to come back to the border, whose charms cannot be easily explained. I have never felt truly American, but I have always felt home in El Paso. My mentors at Stanford told me I was making a huge mistake, that I was ruining my career, and I was ruining my chances to have a good career, that I could not build that career on writing about the border. And that is precisely what I have done. I don't let anybody tell me that El Paso doesn't travel well. My work has been translated into many languages, and Aristotle and Dante has been translated into 30 languages and has sold over 1 million copies and still selling. Two fictionalized Mexican-American boys who live on the border in El Paso, Texas, and discover that they are gay have become international celebrities. My work is centered on Latinos who live in this city in which I live. And my work is respected. I have been able to write from this city because this is where I feel safe. I feel as if I can breathe. I feel like this city belongs to me, regardless of the behavior of the city council. I am difficult. I am difficult to understand. But I live in a city that doesn't have to understand me, to accept me, to respect me, to embrace me. Here, in this city, is where I fight all my battles. This is where I have made friends with remarkable, beautiful, sophisticated, hard-working people who are making the world a better place. I have traveled throughout the nation. I have lived in Denver and Lafayette and Belgium and traveled throughout Europe and spent a summer in Tanzania. I discovered the awesome beauty of the earth I inhabited and kept on moving. Somehow, I was always getting sidetracked. It was no wonder I got lost as I wandered to and fro the earth, feeling more like Satan's progeny than a pilgrim looking for the meaning of life. I always wound up forgetting where I was going. I was not the guy looking for a shortcut to get to my final destination. I took the long way around. I never did learn how to read a map. Hell, I liked getting lost. I liked looking for ways to get lost. Finding my way back to the land of belonging gave my life meaning. But I was soon to discover that finding your way back to the land of belonging was one thing. Making yourself stay there was another thing altogether. I found the paradigm for my life on the first day of school. I got lost. It seemed inevitable. I managed to get on the right bus, but got off on the wrong stop. Of course I did, because I didn't know which way was the right one, the stop that would get me back to my mom. My body felt like an earthquake had hit it, and the panic owned me. I was alone, and the fear that I was never going to find my way home colonized and paralyzed my entire body. It felt like the world was ending. I will never forget that awful afternoon. And I remember this. It was my fault that I got lost. There was no one to blame but me. I have relived that terrifying experiences many times as I have gone through my life. I was once in a bar, and I remember looking at my time on the cell phone. It was 10:30. The next thing I remember was that I was walking through the empty streets of downtown El Paso at 5:30 in the morning. I was terrified. It felt as if I was living in an episode of The Twilight Zone. I walked into a bar one night, and a bad boy, sexy man with a shaved head and tattoos smiled at me and called me babe. I was 55 years old, and I was not a babe. I ordered a drink at the bar, and the bad boy, sexy man appeared in front of me like an angel from somewhere east of Eden. Hey, baby, he said. I'm nobody's baby, I said. Baby, baby, he said. And I wanted him. I wanted this man, and it was strange and exhilarating to become aware that that ache was in me. I bought him drinks, and we got drunk. And then he kissed me like I had never been kissed before. And he whispered in my ear, "Have you ever done crack?" And I shook my head and said, "No." And he said, would you like to try it? And I didn't know I was going to say yes, but that's what I said, yes. And so we left, and I drove and parked my truck in some bad neighborhood in Northeast El Paso. And he got out, and I waited for him, and I wasn't afraid. Well, I should have been, because I knew I was going to take a journey that I should not take, but should not take this road, did not appear in the road map that was in my head. I just then, and we wound up in my apartment, and that was the first time I ever hit a crack pipe. And when I took that first hit, I had never felt anything that had ever made me feel that good, that alive. This. Men are not supposed to feel like gods, but I felt like that, like a god. I fell in love with the apocalypse and rejected normalcy. I may have been lost, but I didn't care. I lived my life chasing the dragon. Sometimes the problem with being lost is that you don't know you're lost. Life called me back again, and I found myself again in the grief of my family. I was alive in the circle of my brothers and sisters gathered around my mother, who was dying. I found myself in being the good son, the good brother, the good boy that my family had always wanted me to be and needed me to be. But there was a kind of death in being a good boy, and besides, I wasn't a good boy anymore. On the day my mother died, I sat alone on her bed after the funeral home took her away from her home, a home that she would never enter again. And how could I ever find my way back home if she, my mother, was home? My grief rendered me powerless, and I felt a sadness I had never felt, and I was broken. I was broken. After we buried my mother, I came home to an apartment that felt even emptier than my heart. Getting lost is to enter into a hell that offers no promise, no certitude that you will ever find a way back from that sunless place. I have flirted with danger many, many times, far too many times, and it is not an accident that I have come face to face with despair, and this more than once. But I was not raised to give in to despair. I was not raised to surrender myself, to be shackled by, to live in the dark prison of despair. Hope is what my mother nurtured in me, and hope was a tree that grew strong in me, and hope remained. My hope remained. Her hope remained in me. But that hope did not return before I spent months and months and months in a hell that seemed like an eternity. I didn't know that you could love a city as much or even more than you loved a human being. Hemingway had Paris, Pablo Casals had Barcelona, and I had El Paso. I remember passing through Segundo Barrio on our way to get our haircuts in Juarez as a boy. All the men had mustaches, spoke Spanish, and wore white shirts. They lived in a place where happiness was something that belonged to everyone. I remember playing with the boys in Juarez who were just like me, except they didn't have my sense of entitlement when I declared my citizenship as I crossed back into the United States. I learned about borders by crossing them, just as I learned about the politics of picking seasons when I was 13, picking onions. Child labor laws be damned. I remember my grandfather taking me to see the alligators in San Jacinto Plaza. I learned about what belonged and what did not belong by watching alligators trying to survive in a small fountain in the center of a border city. Two nations lived inside of me, and they came out when I spoke Spanish or English. These two languages have beat the crap out of each other in my body every day of my life. And I wanted to live where those two languages lived, because I was a man who needed to live surrounded by the words that gave him life. In the fall of 1992, I began teaching at the University of Texas at El Paso. I had begun my journey to become a writer. At the very university where I received an MA in creative writing. I did not know where my career would take me, but I did know where the center of that career would be. Over 30 years, I have forged for myself an enviable career as a writer. I took El Paso along for the ride. It was the least I could do for the city that gave me my voice. 45 and a half miles from where I was born, I am standing here giving this talk. It took me 68 years to travel 45 and a half miles. I wasn't kidding when I said I always took the long way around. But the price of the ticket cost me plenty. But I have to say that the trip was worth everything I paid, and more. I am standing here telling a love story, and there is nothing simple about that story. There are many love stories residing in this heart of mine. I fell in love with writing, and that love took me places I never thought I would go. I have stood before many audiences with my heart in my hand, thanking them for honoring me for my work. And those awards seemed to come rather easily, and they were awards I never believed I deserved. But when they honored me, they honored the city and the resilient people who reside there. I stand here in downtown El Paso, trying to be exact. But there are no exactitudes when it comes to speaking of my love for this complicated town, which is for me the center of all beauty. Living in this city saved my life. Living in this city has taught me what it means to belong to a people who struggle to love and to survive a poverty. That, I don't have the last page. This is so me. I'm lost again. It's true. Yes. Let me find myself again. I lost myself and found myself. To belong to a people who struggle to live and to survive a poverty created by the two countries that surround them. Living in this city saved my life. It has taught me what it means to be alive. They are a city that is hated. They are a city that is also deeply loved and respected. This city has taught me words like suffering and work and humility and dignity and respect and that eternal word love. They are words no writer can live without. So here I am, with my heart on my sleeve, saying thank you. It's all been so lovely. Truly, it's been so lovely. Thank you.